Reporter Paul Moniz is joining us with an eye-opening investigation. Paul?
And John, Connecticut claims to have one of the best 911 systems in the entire country. It is called Enhanced 911. What that means is the address of a caller appears on a dispatcher screen in about 1.5 seconds. The purpose is to send help quickly, but when it comes to medical calls, we found help can come too late.
911 emergency.
I need an ambulance. My daughter is bleeding from the mouth because I thought I got something. I don't know if I hurt her in the mouth.
When emergency strikes and you dial 911, you expect immediate response, but sometimes help comes too late. Chicago, a video camera captures 911 dispatchers dozing off. Philadelphia, a 16-year-old boy is beaten to death after dispatchers wait 40 minutes to send help. And Kentucky, a woman and her 3 children die in a house fire after 911 sends crews to the wrong location. Gone. Response time in some cities is so slow, rap group Public Enemy even wrote a song about it, entitled 911 is a Joke.
Get up and get down. 911 is joke in your town.
In most communities, 911 is not a joke, but a lifesaver. Yet there are problems, and Connecticut is no exception. Danbury, 1993. A known prostitute calls 911 after the John she picks up on this corner passes out after sex. The next morning, the man is found dead in his car. Police say the dispatcher didn't send help because the prostitute often fabricated stories. Today, that dispatcher is back on the job following a 12-day suspension. But Danbury Police Chief Nelson Macedo insists these days all calls are checked out. The Danbury case may be an isolated example, but our month-long investigation raises serious questions about the integrity of the entire 911 system in Connecticut. You see here, there is not one 911 center, but 108 throughout the state, each with its own rules. We found response times vary widely from town to town, and that means where you live could mean the difference between life and death.
911 New Haven.
In larger cities like New Haven, which staff paid paramedics, response is generally quick. In the New Haven calls we went on, it took the rescue squad 4 minutes or less to reach the scene. The following is a rundown of the fastest first response times in communities that keep track of the information. Among the leaders, East Haven and West Haven, where medical help arrives within 3 minutes, 75% of the time. The concern is in towns like Shelton, Seymour, Bethany, and Woodbridge, where it can take 10 minutes or longer for an ambulance to arrive, and where volunteers or police are the first to respond. In Woodbridge, for example, police are the first on the scene. Since there is no ambulance in town, the ambulance has to come from miles away, from New Haven or somewhere else. And while patients are waiting for breathing tubes or IVs, they're left with police officers who have only basic medical training. Ironically, Woodbridge's volunteer fire department has advanced training, but they don't respond unless there is a major accident or fire, and police apparently don't want to give up their place as first responders. Resident Gene Bonady says he feels like a hostage in a turf war. How would you feel if you were having a heart attack and that were the case?
Yeah, I feel very disturbed about it. Why didn't they come sooner?
Pagers alert neighboring Bethany's volunteers to emergencies. When the tone sounds, crews scramble to the scene. Volunteers insist long before an ambulance gets there, trained first responders are on the scene, usually in 2 or 3 minutes. But in Bethany and many other volunteer communities, there are no reliable statistics to back up that claim. That means your safety could be a gamble.
Okay, sir, we're on the way.
And any real help might come too late. Now, we should stress that having a volunteer force does not necessarily result in problems. It just means there's no accurate way of gauging first response times. One official told me if volunteer forces had to report in, callers would have to wait even longer for help. Now, tomorrow we will take a look at the 911 dispatchers themselves. Why do some of them help and others simply refuse to share information that could save your life? And that's coming up tomorrow on Action News at 6.
Do the slower response time towns have any game plan in place to try to improve that?
Well, in Woodbridge, there's a situation where a task force is looking into perhaps allowing the fire department to come in, maybe getting everyone to work together, but this is very political in some cases, and is certainly the case in Woodbridge.
12 minutes can be life or death.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
All right, Paul. Refuse to give life-saving or potentially life-saving information over the phone.
That means if someone you love is in cardiac arrest or choking, they could be dead by the time an ambulance arrives.
Tonight, Action News reporter Paul Moniz continues his special report, 911, when help comes too late.
My first instinct was to turn around and look in the pool, and I saw the baby floating.
I just jumped in the pool, and my sister-in-law Doris ran around the other side of the pool, and she jumped over the pool. It was just limp, totally limp. It's just nothing.
East Haven, 1989. A festive family gathering turns frantic after 2-year-old John Doheny is pulled unconscious from a pool. 911 dispatcher Scott Gravino still remembers that call.
And every grandmother's relatives, everybody just running around crazy, just screaming about their baby.
The concern was reviving Johnny before he suffered brain damage. It only takes about 4 minutes. His Uncle Harold knew by the time an ambulance arrived it might be too late. So he started doing CPR, but nothing happened. That is, until Scott, armed with medical flip cards, told Harold how to clear mucus from the boy's throat.
And that's what we did, and then when we did that and pressed on his chest, on his stomach, the water shot right out of the side of his mouth.
Johnny is now a healthy 6-year-old, alive, his family believes, because of instructions from that 911 operator. But 14-month-old Brooke Hauser of Boca Raton, Florida, was not so lucky. When she fell into a pool, a dispatcher didn't know how to give CPR instructions. And by the time an ambulance arrived, Brooke suffered brain damage and later died. Pre-arrival medical instructions might have made the difference. In short, pre-arrivals are tips dispatchers like these give to callers to stabilize patients while an ambulance is on the way. If someone is choking or in cardiac arrest, such information can save their life. But despite the importance, our investigation shows only 25% of Connecticut's 911 centers routinely give out pre-arrivals, those areas shown in green, such places like Branford, East Haven, Danbury. Another quarter, in yellow, report giving pre-arrivals only sometimes, like Hartford, or transferring calls to hospitals and regional centers like New Haven. But the most disturbing group is the one in red. In more than half of Connecticut's 911 centers, dispatchers give no pre-arrival medical instructions and don't transfer you anywhere to get them. Places like Clinton, Middletown, Woodbridge, and West Hartford.
You stay right where you are and I'll have an officer meet you out front, all right?
In Stratford, dispatchers are not trained in medical procedures either, and there's no secondary answering point. Police brass admit if it's a medical emergency, you're stuck until an ambulance arrives. In essence, people are on their own for those 3 minutes.
They could be, yes. People will lose lives. I don't think I can put it any more simpler than that.
Mike Holden is a spokesperson for Madison-based PowerPhone.
Talking about being a dispatcher...
PowerPhone trains dispatchers in proper medical techniques, but only those communities willing to pay for such training can get it. The question is, why do so many Connecticut 911 centers refuse to share this life-saving information? 2 reasons: staffing and legal concerns.
Would you just stay on the phone a second? Hold on.
Giving pre-arrivals can bog down the system, delaying response time for other calls. And if a dispatcher gives the wrong information, the city or town can be royally sued. New Haven paramedic Greg Liggins demonstrates how easy it is for CPR instructions to be misinterpreted over the phone.
This is the proper position for the hand right now. Now, where my hands are, this is the wrong position right here. You know, it's just that difference. That difference.
So if you're pressing on
if you're pressing there, you can do more damage to the patient.
You can kill the patient.
You can kill the patient.
Still, most safety experts agree pre-arrivals save more lives than they take. And little Johnny is ever so appreciative.
Thank you for saving my life.
You're welcome, John.
Certainly Johnny is a lucky little boy. Now, you may be wondering why dispatchers would ever be allowed on the job without sufficient medical training. The fact is the state does require some training, but not enough. Everything, it seems, comes down to money and politics, and we will take a look at that in Part 3. Now, there is a side note to last night's report. It certainly struck a responsive chord. We received a number of viewer calls and a stack of these email responses, and we want to again stress that our investigation is critical of the fragmented nature of the 911 system, but not of the actual workers involved. Volunteer medical personnel especially are to be commended for filling a void where otherwise there would be no service. But our investigation has found definitively that Connecticut has absolutely no system in place to ensure the same level of service statewide. And we will have more on that coming up tomorrow.
Somehow it doesn't seem adequate that people need help and that liability problems could get in the way of giving that help.
But it really is, because as Greg Liggins demonstrated there, the paramedic, there are situations where perhaps the information could be misinterpreted over the phone, and that is what the towns fear. Someone dies, let's say, and they want to make sure the information is put into someone else's hands.
Paul, is anybody talking about some state legislation to make this across the board safer?
Well, the state is looking at that, and that's something that's being considered right now. They're talking about revamping the training, and when we show you tomorrow's part, you'll understand just how fragmented the training really is.
Good report. The system, such as dispatchers not giving life-saving information over the phone because towns fear legal ramifications.
Another problem is inadequate training. Paul Moniz continues his series 911, when help comes too late.
This is 911. Do you have an emergency?
Today on Rescue 911.
In the show Rescue 911, help always comes fast, but that is not reality.
You just stay on the phone a second? Hold on.
Limited resources and frivolous calls
I have a bat in my house.
sometimes mean delayed response, and in a medical emergency, instructions by a 911 dispatcher can be crucial.
How did the child start bleeding?
She was choking on tissues, and I tried to clear her throat, and I think I might have hurt her in the throat.
Okay, ma'am, just calm down.
Oh,
Calm
God.
down.
I hope I didn't hurt her.
Okay, ma'am.
Recently, a Seymour mom phoned this New Haven Regional Health Center called CMED. An operator dispatches an ambulance
2 Tango 6 16425.
and tells the mom how to prevent her baby from choking on her own blood.
Okay, take a washcloth, wet it down with some cool water. Okay, and have the child suck on the washcloth. The cool water will make her feel better.
As we've told you, such pre-arrival instructions are the exception in Connecticut rather than the rule. The red area represents more than half the state's 911 centers that don't give pre-arrivals, fearing lawsuits from inadequately trained dispatchers.
It is very scary.
Alice Legge is a veteran emergency medical technician.
There's some people in 911 centers who answer the phone, and they're not even medically trained to even know the difference between their choking and, you know, something quite simple is maybe a child has a cold and it's just, you know, phlegm or whatever. You know, there's people who don't know.
As soon as you get the report, you put that missing person into the system immediately.
Part of the problem is state training. In Connecticut, state law says all 911 dispatchers hired after 1990 must be trained. But the 70-hour course only includes 6 hours on medical instruction, and dispatchers hired before 1990 are grandfathered in and don't have to be trained at all.
The dispatchers are interested in...
Some communities opt to pay for private training like this. But Telecommunications Director George Pahorlak admits state training leaves dispatchers medically ill-equipped.
We say you need additional training in order to perform pre-arrival instructions. Certainly CPR training, and certainly maybe beyond that.
What's the state doing here? I mean, you guys are in charge of making sure this happens. Why isn't something being done?
It comes down to monies, finances again.
We took our concerns to State Senator Steve Dargan, the co-chair of Connecticut's Public Safety Committee. He says politics and cold, hard cash are standing in the way of better service. A concept called home rule allows cities and towns to organize their 911 systems any way they choose, and most want to keep it that way.
The number of mayors and first selectmen have stated to us as legislators on the state level not to enforce any more mandates if, in fact, the state is not going to fund these mandates.
8 years. 4 years.
4 years. 3 years.
Recently, we talked with 911 dispatchers from across the state. Training wasn't their only concern, but town rules. Carol Namico is a certified EMT, but cannot give CPR or Heimlich instructions because the town of Woodbridge, fearing lawsuits, won't let her.
See, that's like that's right now under the directions that I'm under in Woodbridge, I can't give direction. I can only send an ambulance.
As we told you Monday, even though police respond first, it can take 12 minutes or longer for an ambulance to get to Woodbridge because the town has no ambulance of its own. And even if your town has an ambulance, half the state's 911 dispatchers won't tell you what to do until help gets there, which may be too late. Now, after watching this series, you may be wondering what Connecticut is doing to improve the 911 system. The state is, in fact, in the process of increasing medical instruction for dispatchers, but that could take months. Senator Dargan of the Public Safety Committee says as a result of our investigation, he will push for a system-wide review. Now, if you feel helpless in all of this, you will not want to miss part 4 of our series coming up tonight at 11. It could save your life when 911 can't.